The black sky merged with the roaring sea, turning the world into one endless curtain of water. The old fishing boat belonging to Grace's father rose on the crest of towering waves, only to plunge into the abyss moments later. Her heart would stop. Grace gripped the wheel tightly, trying to stay steady, but the deck kept slipping from under her feet. Another wave slammed into the vessel with ferocious power, flooding it completely. The fisherwoman no longer fought for control. Instinctively, she understood that the storm was no enemy, but something beyond reason, something that had decided to claim what was its due. A sudden flash of lightning tore through the darkness for an instant, revealing the empty deck. Neither her father nor the crewman was there. They had been swept away. The next wave engulfed the boat entirely and, with devastating force, ripped the roof off the wheelhouse. Salt water blinded her eyes, filled her mouth, and lashed her face with icy whips. Grace felt herself lifted and hurled into terrifying emptiness, carried farther from a sinking boat. She struggled for a long time, losing all sense of direction, until consciousness faded. She came to on the shore when the sea had calmed its rage somewhat and rumbled heavily and wearily, as though gathering strength for another assault. The girl rose, swaying from weakness and the bruises on her battered body, and walked along the tide line. Her eyes automatically scanned the sand and rocks. A broken crate appeared, a piece of rigging, a familiar canvas jacket. She was searching for the bodies of her loved ones, hoping for a miracle, but instead she stumbled upon something entirely different. Half submerged in the water, wedged between sharp rocks, a small white yacht lay tilted. Its graceful hull was scarred by the impacts against the stones. Forgetting her own pain, Grace climbed inside in search of survivors. She clung to slippery handrails. The smell of spilled fuel hit her nose. Water in the cabins reached her knees, lazily rocking broken furniture. Suddenly the silence was pierced by a desperate, choking infant's cry. She rushed toward the sound and froze. In a high-sided crib secured with special straps hung two tiny babies. She stretched out her trembling hands toward them, and at that moment her gaze fixed on the round porthole. Behind the thick glass, in the murky water, the pale face of a young woman was frozen. Her eyes, widened by absolute terror, stared straight at Grace. One hand seemed to reach toward the glass in a silent plea before the current slowly pulled the body into the milky darkness. She cried out and sat bolt upright in bed. Her t-shirt was soaked with cold sweat. Her heart pounded wildly. In her ears still rang that piercing infant wail mixed with the restless roar of the sea. Grace sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the frantic beating of her own heart. The dream would not release her. It seemed the old memories, buried for 2 decades, were returning often in her sleep, as if foretelling trouble or warning of something inevitable that would touch her children. She had always known that happiness gifted by the sea must one day be paid for, and that quiet waiting wore her down without her noticing. "Mum, get up." The door creaked softly and Ethan poked his head in. "That guy from the council is back with the inspection. Has been spreading his papers for 10 minutes already." Grace sighed heavily, looking at the handsome, tall young man with tan skin and thick dark hair. "Incoming, love, he'll be right down," replied the owner of the little seaside cafe, trying to keep her voice steady. After the lunchtime rush, she had napped as usual under the heavy July heat that always hung over their small coastal town. The cafe, tucked in an old weathered building right on the harbour wall, was their only source of income. It was high summer, the time to earn enough to survive the grey, stormy winter months, carry out repairs, and prepare for the next season. Ethan and Lily, having passed their final year exams at the Polytechnic, spent the whole summer helping their mother in the cafe. The woman felt proud to the point of tears. Her children had grown up hardworking, clever, and beautiful. They were her greatest triumph in life. She splashed cool water on her face to wash away the remnants of the nightmare and looked in the mirror. A strong woman, still attractive but prematurely aged, stared back at her with deep lines at the corners of her eyes. She tied on her apron and headed down the stairs. Descending into the dining area, Grace paused a moment to admire her daughter. Lily, graceful and bright as a southern bird, served a group of tourist lads with her usual smile. They were clearly reluctant to leave, showering compliments and dragging out the simple purchase of ice cream, but she handled their flirtation deftly and politely. The room was cool. The air conditioner hummed steadily while outside the coastal tarmac melted in the heat. At the corner table sat the same man. Printed sheets lay before him. Grace recognized the visitor. The young official from the new Archive Review Commission. He looked provocatively formal, crisp iron shirt and tight tie despite the relaxed resort atmosphere of the town. His sharp elbows rested on the table and his eyes assessed the girl behind the counter. Grace took a deep breath, put on her welcoming hostess mask, and approached. "Good morning, back again," she said, sitting opposite him. "Tea? Coffee? The pastries are excellent today. On the house, of course." The civil servant slowly raised his head, adjusted his stylish glasses, and offered her a dry, formal smile that sent a chill down her spine. "Thank you, Grace Harper. Let's get to business." His voice was thin and emotionless. "As I explained last time, with the digital reform of the registries, we are reviewing all old emergency cases. Your situation, shall we say, arouses my professional interest. Is there a problem with the CAF license?" Grace tried to sound casual, though her heart trembled. "Your CAF is irrelevant." The careerist tapped a long finger on the printouts. "There are serious questions about the legality of guardianship over Ethan and Lily. In the chaos 19 years ago, when the storm wiped out half the town, documents were, let's say, drawn up on the knee. According to your statement in the file. Children of a cousin. No parents' names, no birth certificates, no death certificate for the mother. I might even suspect they appeared out of nowhere. I've explained it hundreds of times." Grace hid her hands under the table. "My cousin lived in a village farther up the coast. The hurricane destroyed everything. I took them from the reception center when it was all confusion. I was afraid they'd be separated. Then I formalized guardianship. The whole town will confirm they're mine." "The town may confirm, but the law does not," he cut in. "This reeks of illegal detention of minors, falsification of records, and you know where that leads. Not just a fine, but real prison time for fraud. You understand, Grace Harper. I am obliged to forward this to the Crown Prosecution Service." Although he paused meaningfully, glancing at Lily laughing at a joke behind the counter, then at Ethan carrying a tray piled with dirty dishes, preparing such a report is long and tedious. Extra burden on my department, and was short-staffed at the moment. If you could come up with, say, a sum equivalent to the value of this place over a couple of seasons, I could deem those archives lost and close the matter for good. Grace felt her throat go dry. The amount he hinted at was impossible for them. It meant giving up every penny saved for repairs and education, and still going into debt. "I don't have that kind of money," she whispered. Very regrettable, the bureaucrat closed the folder indifferently and stood, picking up his leather briefcase. "Think it over. I expect an answer by the end of the week. Good day, proprietor." He left, letting in a blast of hot air from the street. Grace remained seated, staring at his empty coffee cup. Everything swam before her eyes. She faced a choice. Lose everything she had built over years, or go to prison and leave Ethan and Lily alone and unsupported. At midnight, the cafe closed and Grace followed her children out onto the promenade. They laughed and walked ahead. She followed slowly, breathing in the thick air scented with iodine. It was muggy. Tourists strolled along the shore, some laughed and played guitar. Youths zipped past on scooters. Her thoughts rolled like heavy stones. Where to find the money? Sell the cafe? Would it satisfy the young extortionist's greed? But losing income meant leaving herself and the children without bread. She entered the house. The kitchen light was on. Lily, in a light robe, set out plates of vegetables and cheese. Ethan sat at the table. "Mum, has worn you out, hasn't he?" "You look pale," said the daughter. "Tell us honestly, what does he want? He doesn't look like the usual council inspectors we know. More like a leech." Grace sank heavily into a chair and covered her eyes with her hand. "He didn't come for the cafe. They're digging up old archives, looking for inconsistencies in your documents." Ethan and Lily exchanged glances. The young man rose, opened a kitchen drawer, and took out a small wrap parcel. He placed it in the middle of the table and unwrapped it. Under the lamplight gleamed a heavy gold pendant covered in intricate ancient filigree. "Is this what they're after?" the son asked, looking straight into his mother's eyes. "Mum, we're not blind. Lily and I have always known we were different. This old pendant I found among the old things tell us finally who we really are." Grace felt the dam she had held her whole life begin to crack. 19 years ago, in that storm when my father died and his fishing boat sank, the sea took half the town. I found you on a beautiful yacht smashed against the rocks. Grace shuddered, remembering the lifeless face of the drowned woman. There was no one else alive. From the cabin, I took a man's leather satchel with documents, hoping to trace your family, but the water turned the papers to mush. Only this jewelry remained. You never told us we weren't yours, Lily swallowed, bewildered. Then how were we registered with your surname? After the storm there was chaos, darling. The town half-flooded, no communications, so many dead even now not all identified. Grace laid her heavy hand on the table. I carried you both to the rescue post myself, bruised all over, you crying with hunger. I saw the reception center full of weeping children about to be separated. My heart broke. I feared you'd be parted. It was easier to register you under my name, even temporarily, than deal with unidentified orphans. Temporary often becomes permanent. Databases weren't digital back then. The human factor decided everything. And the yacht? Ethan frowned. Why wasn't it identified? I got you out in the lull between two squalls. By the time I reached town, the hurricane had struck again and everyone was evacuated. It seems the sea smashed the vessel against the rocks and carried the wreckage away. I went back later, but found no trace. Grace fell silent, unable to meet her children's eyes. Silence filled the room. Ethan thoughtfully touched the beautiful pattern on the pendant and said, So you risked everything for us, Mum. We always knew you were special, Lily said softly. We remember everything. How you took in fish on the pier at night, how your hands cracked from salt and cold, how you stood knee-deep in water at the fish factory in rubber boots so we never went without. She stroked her mother's rough palms. Mum, you taught us everything we know. Ethan hugged her. And I remember the first smokehouse in the yard, how you baked fish pies and sold them, then the stall at the fish market, and finally we opened the cafe. One of the best in town, according to the reviews. In their voices Grace heard not horror or rejection, but boundless tenderness and love. Mum, we won't let anyone hurt you, Lily said, looking at her brother. That bureaucrat at the cafe, Ethan frowned. He hinted at money, right? He knows you broke the law and wants to profit. We need to figure out how to shut him up. He tapped the gleaming jewelry. He'll post photos of this on collectors' forums. It has a unique hallmark, rare piece. Maybe we get enough to buy him off and end this forever. What are you saying, Ethan? Grace shook her head in fear. We can't sell it. It's the only link you have left to your real parents, its memory. Doesn't it hurt you? Lily laid her warm hand over her mother's trembling one and whispered, Mum darling, can a piece of gold be worth more than you? You raised us, you protected us. It's just a pretty trinket. You are the only one, and nothing will ever be more precious than you. Ethan's right. If this helps protect you, we sell it. Ethan wasted no time and photographed the pendant from every angle. Lily searched online for suitable antique collector sites. Grace watched them and once again realized that the sea had given her not just children, but a true treasure. A few days passed. The cafe owner sat at the corner table enjoying a rare moment of quiet. Notifications popped up on her old smartphone screen. The lot on the antique forum had drawn attention. One expert commented that the pendant dated to the late Victorian era and, if genuine, could fetch a substantial sum. Grace no longer felt like a helpless victim. If it worked out, she could settle the matter with the greedy official. The doorbell jingled. Grace looked up. Unusual tourists entered. Shorts and flip-flops. A woman in a stiff silk suit the color of sand stopped several steps from the counter, as if afraid to dirty herself in the humble surroundings. Straight back, imperious gaze of one used to giving orders. Beside her a man with a folder, like an assistant. Behind them another man with a briefcase. The woman scanned the walls, tables, and the couple of diners. Then her gaze settled on Grace. The visitor said something brief in English. The interpreter stepped forward. Good morning. Allow me to introduce myself. This is Lady Victoria. I am her assistant and interpreter. We corresponded with you regarding the listing for the gold pendant. We've come as agreed and would like to verify the authenticity of the lot. Good morning. Grace rose slowly. Of course, please sit down. Victoria did not sit. She studied Grace's face intently, as if trying to gauge who she was dealing with. She spoke again and the interpreter continued, softer but insistent. Lady Victoria values honesty and asks to see the pendant if you have it with you. Grace took the jewelry from her pocket and handed it over. The man received it with reverence and passed it to the other, who sat down, opened his case, took out an optical instrument, and began examining the piece closely. Everyone waited for his verdict. The appraiser looked up, met his lady's eyes, and gave a short affirmative nod. Grace took the pendant back. At that moment Lily came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She wanted to ask her mother something but froze when she met the guest's gaze. Victoria suddenly paled. The hand clutching the expensive designer bag trembled noticeably. Grace saw her pupils narrow. The Englishwoman stared at Lily as if she had seen a ghost. When Ethan appeared next with a tray, Victoria swayed and gripped the edge of the counter. She looked back and forth between Ethan and Lily, her cold calculating eyes reflecting recognition and superstitious dread. Ethan stopped beside his sister and looked questioningly at the strange group. "My God," whispered the Englishwoman, her voice shaking. The interpreter hesitated, glancing between his lady and the young people. Victoria took a deep breath to regain composure and spoke quickly, gesturing toward the exit. "Lady Victoria invites all three of you to the restaurant at the Golden Shores Hotel, where we are staying," the assistant translated hurriedly. "She is prepared to purchase the pendant at any price you name, but the conversation must take place there. It is a very personal matter, please understand." When the black car drove off with the guests, the last customers left the cafe. Ethan set down the tray. "Mum, who was that?" She looked at us as if we'd stolen her purse. "The buyer for the pendant." Grace rubbed her forehead thoughtfully. "Close-up shop, kids. Let's go and hear them out. It seems this pendant is worth far more than we thought." A tourist paused outside the cafe, debating whether to enter, but the owner calmly hung the closed until 5 p.m. sign on the door. The restaurant's grand hall greeted them with sterile coolness and the chime of expensive crystal. Victoria waited at a distant table. Before her only an untouched cup of coffee and a phone. Beside her the same assistant. When Grace and the children approached, the Englishwoman gestured for them to sit. She stared at Ethan and Lily with eyes in which cold calculation battled rising emotion. "Tell me," she began through the interpreter, "where did this pendant come from and who are these young people?" "The truth only." Grace, uncomfortable amid such ostentatious luxury, clasped her hands under the table. She recounted briefly the storm years ago, the yacht wrecked on the rocks, the babies in the cradle, the leather satchel found. As she spoke, Victoria's face grew paler and filled with compassion. "This pendant is an ancient heirloom of our family," Victoria whispered, and the interpreter repeated. "My brother wore it as the eldest heir. We searched for the yacht for months after the storm until the insurers and police closed the case, declaring everyone lost. My father never accepted it." Victoria fell silent and gazed long at Ethan. Grace saw how she studied every movement of the young man, the stubborn set of his jaw, and how her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I must be certain," she said, addressing the children. "Please give me a hair each. My heart already believes in the miracle, but I need proof." Ethan and Lily exchanged glances. The young man pulled out a hair first and placed it in the bag the assistant held out. Lily followed. A couple of days passed. During that time, Victoria's assistants finalized the purchase of the pendant, transferring a substantial sum to Grace's account. But calm did not come. On the contrary, the air felt charged. At sunset, a black car stopped at the gate of their old house. Victoria strode into the courtyard, clutching a sheet of paper. Her usually impassive face glowed with feverish excitement. The assistant followed. "The DNA test confirms kinship," the interpreter announced. "They are my brother's children. Blood of our line." Victoria stepped toward Ethan, reaching to touch his face, but he stepped back and stood shoulder to shoulder with his sister and mother. The Englishwoman spoke sharply and the interpreter repeated, "Pack your things. Lady Victoria is taking you with her. You do not belong in this backwater. You belong in a manor house." Grace felt the ground give way beneath her. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She pressed her hands to her chest, unable to speak, terrified of loss. But Lily suddenly hugged her. "We're not going anywhere. Our mother stands before you. This is our home and we will not abandon it. We don't need your wealth paid for with her tears." Victoria froze, her face twisted with anger and hurt. She looked at Ethan, but he only put his arm around Grace's shoulders. The Englishwoman realized that neither her status nor her money could break this bond. She turned abruptly, took out her phone, and dialed a number. She spoke in English with strained urgency. "It is done." Grace did not know to whom it was addressed, but it sounded like the start of a storm even more terrible than the one 19 years earlier. The children stood beside her, frightened but resolute, ready to defend their small world to the end. The next morning Grace received a message from Victoria, short. Father wishes to see you all. The car will arrive in 1 hour. The words held no commanding tone now, only a restrained plea. Grace looked at the children. They were serious, but fear had left their eyes. Only determination to protect their family remained. Precisely on time, a black sedan glided to a stop outside the house. They entered the cool silence of the hotel and were silently escorted to the glass doors of the conference room. Inside smelled of refined oriental perfume. Security men stood here and there. By the panoramic window stood an elderly man. He looked frail, but his bearing held power. He leaned on a cane topped with a gold lion's head. Victoria stood beside him, explaining something quietly. Grace noticed her perfectly made-up eyes were red-rimmed and her immaculate hair slightly disheveled. The woman had clearly spent a sleepless night. Seeing them enter, the old man took several unsteady steps forward. The assistant bowed and introduced him. Sir Reginald Harrington. Sir Reginald approached Grace and took her hands in his dry, warm, trembling ones. He gazed long at those work-worn hands, marked with tiny scars from knives and salt, then lifted his eyes to hers. In his pupils Grace saw not the arrogance of a magnet, but a living fire and shining tears. The old man spoke something low and heartfelt in English. The interpreter translated with unexpected warmth. Sir Reginald wishes to thank you, Grace. He has seen your hands and knows that every day of his grandchildren's lives has been bought with your hard labour and your love. Sir Reginald stepped toward Ethan and Lily. He embraced them awkwardly, in the clumsy way of old men. The children stiffened, not yet feeling warmth toward the stranger, but the sincerity of his tears softened their hearts. The old man drew back, leaned on his cane, and spoke again. The interpreter continued. My daughter Victoria runs my construction empire and has earned that right. I cannot and will not change anything in business. But these children are the miracle the sea returned to me before death. I will give them everything. Education in Europe, name, inheritance. But the home they choose themselves. Silence fell, but now it was light, not heavy. Ethan took Grace's hand. We are deeply grateful, he said, but money cannot replace the mother who warmed us in the cold and fed us when she herself had nothing. Our home is here, with her, and we will not leave her. To betray her would be to betray ourselves. Grace saw Victoria suddenly sob and cover her face with her hands. Behind the calculating businesswoman stood simply a woman who had loved and lost a brother, and now found her niece and nephew. Victoria approached Grace and embraced her cautiously, as if afraid to startle her. The interpreter translated. I was so afraid of losing my brother's memory that I forgot what it is to simply love. Forgive me for my harshness. Sir Reginald nodded in satisfaction. His eyes shone with quiet joy. So be it, the interpreter rendered his words. The inheritance remains for the grandchildren. They will see the world, but their harbour will be here. And now Sir Reginald asks you to share dinner with him. The table is already set in the restaurant. The solemn silence was abruptly broken by the clatter of heels and the door flying open. The young official burst in, breathing hard and straightening his tie. Grace Harper. He shouted, irritation unconcealed. Why must I chase you all over town? The deadline for my proposal has passed. You seem not to grasp the seriousness of your position. He approached, exuding cheap cologne and self-importance. I declare officially. You are 5 minutes from prison. Illegal detention of other people's children, falsification of official documents, perjury. He swept the room with a triumphant gaze. All papers go to prosecution today. The interpreter rendered every word into English. The magnate's face, until then full of tenderness for his grandchildren, hardened like stone. He stepped forward and struck the floor sharply with his cane. The sound was short and sharp as a shot. The old man spoke in English, his voice low yet vibrating with suppressed fury silenced the official mid-sentence. The interpreter repeated, staring straight into the pale bureaucrat's eyes. Young man, you seek discrepancies in my grandchildren's documents? Consider that my solicitors have already prepared a counterclaim for defamation, harassment, and extortion. You have turned your petty inspection into an international scandal that will obliterate your career. The bureaucrat retreated. He looked from the gold lion's head on the cane to the stern face of the foreigner and to Grace, now shielded by these people. It dawned on him that he had drawn far too much attention to his lucrative post and had run into a power his miserable bribes could not buy. Sorry, a misunderstanding, he stammered, backing toward the exit. Error in the archives. Well, check everything. Excuse me. He almost ran from the hotel under Sir Reginald's icy silence, nearly stumbling at the threshold. Sir Reginald nodded briefly to his daughter and she stepped aside, pressing the phone to her ear and speaking in English with animated gestures. While Grace, the children, and the old man moved toward the restaurant, Victoria discussed matters on the phone. The dining room was cool and welcoming. Sir Reginald took the head of the table, propped his cane, and with a gesture invited everyone to sit. Grace sat down, her hands still trembled slightly, and her mind lingered on threats of prison and forgery. Victoria entered a few minutes later, looking confident and calm. She sat beside Grace and, contrary to her earlier coldness, gently took her elbow. She waited for the interpreter to draw near and spoke, looking Grace straight in the eye. "Listen to me, Grace," her voice firm and reassuring. "I have just spoken with our solicitors. You have nothing to fear. Father and I are taking this matter under our protection. That man will not dare threaten you again." Grace started to object, but Victoria lightly squeezed her hand to ask her to listen. First, the interpreter translated, "Every country has statutes of limitation. Even if someone wished to prosecute you for irregularities from 19 years ago, the time has long expired. You cannot be tried for mistakes made so long ago. His threats are empty words with no force." Grace breathed deeply. The suffocating fear began to recede. Second, Victoria smiled faintly, "You saved the children amid chaos and storm. In law, this is called necessity. Saving a life outweighs any formality. Any court would recognize it. And most importantly, to accuse requires a victim. My father recognizes you as the savior of our family. Ethan and Lily are loyal to you. To the law, you are a mother in good faith, and we will prove it to anyone who dares raise a voice against you." Sir Reginald, watching, nodded approvingly and pushed a plate of fruit toward Grace. "Eat, my dear," the assistant translated his brief words. "Now you are under the protection of the family." Grace looked at Ethan and Lily. They sat beside her, and in their eyes she saw not only love but pride in her. The evening sun gilded the glasses on the table. For the first time in many years, Grace felt an invisible but unbreakable wall rise behind her. Around the lavish table laden with dishes Grace and her children had never tasted, conversation flowed with family warmth. Victoria, with her efficiency, began discussing plans. Her company would buy the land and rebuild the old cafe into the finest restaurant on the coast. Grace listened, still scarcely believing what was happening. A year later, the coastal town still welcomed countless tourists, but its brightest jewel was the new building on the promenade. In place of the old cafe now stood a modern, spacious restaurant, its stylish illuminated sign shining above the entrance. On opening day, every table was full. Tourists drawn by advertising and the aroma of exquisite seafood dishes filled the terrace. Grace, in an elegant dress, barely kept up with the congratulations. She no longer hauled heavy crates. She was now the owner of a large, thriving business on the beloved shore. Ethan and Lily also received congratulations. They had recently graduated from the Polytechnic. Both helped their mother on this important day, deftly managing the guests. When the excitement of the celebration subsided and a soft southern night settled over the town, Grace stepped out onto the promenade. The warm breeze caressed her face, bringing the scent of salt and blooming bougainvillea. The children came and stood on either side. "Mum, tomorrow at 10 the flight leaves," Ethan said, hugging her shoulders. "Grandfather will meet us at Heathrow." "We won't be long, Mum," Lily added. "Just complete the internship at Aunt Victoria's firm, see the world, and we'll be straight back. We still have the second dining room to open by autumn." Grace listened to their voices blending with the murmur of the waves and felt the storm that had tormented her for so many years finally subside completely. She looked at the dark expanse of water hiding so many secrets and pains in its depths. Yes, on that terrible night the sea took her father and her familiar life, but in exchange it cast ashore two tiny bundles of life that became her salvation and her pride. Gazing at her beloved, honest, and loving children, Grace understood that a woman could not dream of greater happiness in this life. She was truly happy.